Imagine dedicating 11 years to building the systems that keep an entire company alive. You solve every crisis, work through sleepless nights, save millions of dollars, and become the one person everyone depends on. Then one morning you're called into a meeting that lasts less than 10 minutes. You're thanked for your service and shown the door. Management is convinced a team of consultants can replace everything you know in just a few days. First, it looks like they made the right decision. But when small problems begin appearing across the business, nobody realizes they're witnessing the beginning of something much bigger. This isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about what happens when experience is treated like an expense instead of an investment. And by the end, the people who made that decision would learn one lesson they would never forget. The invitation arrived at 7:12 a.m. Just as Ethan Carter poured his first cup of coffee. Mandatory leadership alignment. Attendance required. The title alone made him pause. In 11 years at NorthBridge Logistics, meetings with names like that never ended with promotions. They ended with empty desks, security badges that no longer worked, and carefully rehearsed speeches from people who had never spent a single night fixing production servers. Ethan stared at the screen for a few seconds before taking another sip. "Well," he muttered, "this should be interesting." Outside, rain tapped softly against the office windows. Inside, the engineering floor was unusually quiet. Conversations stopped whenever someone walked past. Slack notifications felt slower than usual, almost hesitant. Everyone sensed something. Conference room Atlas was already half full when Ethan walked in. At one end of the table sat Daniel Ross, the company's newly hired chief technology officer. 42 years old, expensive suit, flawless smile, and the kind of confidence that usually came from PowerPoint presentations instead of experience. Next to him were two HR managers with identical folders resting neatly in front of them. Neither looked comfortable. "Ethan," Daniel said warmly, "please have a seat." He did. The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then Daniel folded his hands. "First, I'd like to thank you for everything you've contributed over the years." There it was. Corporate language always started with gratitude. Real gratitude rarely did. As NorthBridge continues modernizing its technology strategy, Daniel continued, "We're restructuring several departments to improve efficiency." One of the HR representatives slid a folder across the table. "We've decided to eliminate your position. Not performance. Not misconduct. Not budget cuts. Just eliminate." Ethan looked at the folder but didn't touch it. "I'm assuming this decision has already been approved." Daniel nodded. "It has. So today's meeting isn't really a discussion." "I'm afraid not." The younger HR representative smiled politely. "This isn't related to your performance. Your evaluations have consistently exceeded expectations." Ethan couldn't help smiling. "I've always found that sentence fascinating." Both HR representatives looked confused. He continued, "Whenever a company tells you your performance is exceptional right before firing you, what they're really saying is they know they can't justify the decision." Daniel leaned forward. "This isn't personal. It never is. We're moving towards standardized cloud platforms. Much of the infrastructure you've maintained will be outsourced." "I see. Our consulting partner specializes in rapid migration." Ethan nodded slowly. "They've already reviewed our architecture?" Daniel smiled. "They've assured us everything can be documented and transferred within a week." For the first time that morning, Ethan almost laughed. "Almost. The entire freight optimization platform?" "Yes." "The warehouse routing engine?" "Yes." "The forecasting models?" Daniel kept smiling. "Our consultants are very experienced." Ethan finally opened the folder. Inside was a severance agreement, 12 weeks of salary, health coverage, confidentiality clauses, intellectual property reminders, standard legal language. He turned each page without speaking. Then he reached the final page. His employment would officially end 5 business days later. 5. After more than a decade, the younger HR manager asked softly, "Do you have any questions?" Ethan closed the folder. "Only one." Daniel nodded. "Go ahead. Who made the final recommendation?" A brief silence filled the room. Daniel answered, "I did." Ethan simply nodded. "Thank you." That response seemed to surprise everyone. No argument? Daniel asked. What would be the point? We expected. You expected anger. Nobody answered. He stood. I'll complete whatever transition documentation is required. Daniel looked relieved. I appreciate your professionalism. Ethan picked up the folder. I wouldn't confuse professionalism with agreement. Without another word, he walked out. His desk looked exactly the same as it had the day before. Family photo. Mechanical keyboard with worn-out keycaps. 3 notebooks filled with years of handwritten diagrams. A tiny cactus someone had given him during his 5th anniversary at the company. Nothing had changed. Except everything. His Slack messages kept arriving. Can you check the warehouse sync? Quick question about route manager. Need your help with an API timeout. Nobody outside management knew. Not yet. Ethan answered every message. One by one. Exactly as he always had. By lunchtime, rumors had already started spreading. Someone from finance stopped by. I heard they're replacing internal engineering with consultants. Ethan smiled politely. Rumors travel fast. You okay? I will be. She nodded before quietly walking away. At 2 p.m. Daniel gathered the engineering department. I'd like everyone to welcome our transition partners from Apex Digital Solutions. 5 consultants entered. Fresh laptops. Matching company jackets. Confident smiles. Their team lead immediately began describing migration strategies. Microservices. AI-assisted deployment. Infrastructure automation. Cloud-first architecture. The buzzwords flowed effortlessly. Ethan listened without interrupting. Until one consultant pointed at a system diagram. So this routing engine seems straightforward. Several engineers glanced toward Ethan. Straightforward. The routing engine had taken nearly 6 years to stabilize. It processed millions of shipping combinations every day. It wasn't complicated because the code was elegant. It was complicated because reality was. Weather delays. Driver shortages. International customs. Fuel pricing. Rail congestion. Holiday demand. Regional labor strikes. Thousands of exceptions layered on top of each other over years of experience. Daniel looked at Ethan. Anything you'd like to add? Ethan considered the question carefully. Then he answered. Only this. The room became quiet. Software doesn't become valuable because someone writes code. He looked directly at the consultants. It becomes valuable because someone spends years learning why the obvious solution keeps failing. Nobody spoke. One consultant finally cleared his throat. We'll document everything. Ethan nodded. I hope you do. Because deep down, he already knew documentation was never the difficult part. Understanding was. By Wednesday morning, Ethan's calendar looked almost normal. Almost. Meeting after meeting appeared under a new label. Knowledge transfer session. The phrase sounded harmless. In reality, it meant one thing. Teach the people replacing you how to do your job before you leave. At precisely 9 a.m., Ethan walked into training room carrying nothing but his laptop and a notebook that had followed him through countless late-night incidents. 5 consultants from Apex Digital Solutions were already waiting. Their team lead, Ryan Ellis, greeted him with a confident handshake. Looking forward to learning from you. Ethan smiled politely. I hope so. Daniel entered a minute later. This shouldn't take more than 3 days, he announced. Once everything is documented, the transition will be complete. Ethan didn't answer. He simply connected his laptop to the projector. The first slide appeared. NorthBridge Freight Platform, Operational Architecture. No flashy animations. No colorful marketing graphics. Just systems. Real ones. The routing platform, Ethan began, isn't one application. He switched to the next slide. It's 27 independent services that evolved over 11 years. Ryan interrupted. We'll probably consolidate those. You probably will. It'll simplify maintenance. For a while. Ryan frowned. What does that mean? Ethan zoomed into a section of the diagram. See this warehouse scheduling service? Everyone nodded. It exists because the original system failed during the winter storms of 2018. Another slide. This inventory buffer? Added after a supplier accidentally duplicated 70,000 orders. Another. The customs validation layer? Built because 3 countries changed import regulations within 48 hours. Silence filled the room. None of those systems existed because an engineer wanted complexity. They existed because reality demanded it. Ryan crossed his arms. We'll rebuild most of this using modern frameworks. Ethan nodded. That's your decision. You disagree? I don't disagree with rebuilding. He paused. I disagree with rebuilding before understanding why something survived this long. The afternoon became a parade of questions. Where are the deployment scripts? How are emergency rollbacks handled? What happens if warehouse synchronization fails? Ethan answered every question. Clearly, patiently, professionally. But every explanation ended the same way. It depends. The consultants hated that answer. Ryan finally sighed. There are too many exceptions. There are exactly as many exceptions as we've encountered. Wouldn't standardization remove most of them? Ethan leaned back. Tell me. Ryan looked up. Have you ever managed freight deliveries during a nationwide fuel shortage? No. A port workers' strike? No. Snowstorms across 3 distribution regions? No. A ransomware attack against one of your shipping partners? Ryan hesitated. No. Ethan nodded. Those are the exceptions. Around noon, Daniel stopped by. How's everything going? Ryan smiled confidently. We're making excellent progress. Ethan remained quiet. Daniel looked pleased. Great. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. As soon as he left, one of the younger consultants spoke. I think management believes this system is much simpler than it actually is. Ryan shrugged. Everything looks complicated until you modernize it. Ethan closed his notebook. Sometimes. Then he looked directly at Ryan. And sometimes the complicated part isn't the software. It's the business. That evening Ethan stayed later than everyone else. Not because anyone asked him to. Because habits built over 11 years didn't disappear overnight. He walked slowly through the operations floor. Each monitor reminded him of a different crisis. That dashboard. He built it after the warehouse outage in Chicago. Those alert rules. Written after an entire fleet disappeared from GPS tracking for 6 hours. The forecasting engine. 3 years of testing before anyone trusted its recommendations. Every screen carried memories invisible to everyone else. His phone buzzed. A message from Melissa, one of the senior operations managers. Can you stop by before you leave? She was waiting beside the logistics control wall. I just heard, she said quietly. I'm sorry. It's business. No. She shook her head. It's management. They stood in silence for a moment. Finally she asked, can they actually replace what you know? Ethan looked toward the enormous screen showing thousands of shipments moving across the country. They can replace me. He smiled faintly. Everyone's replaceable. She waited. But experience isn't. Thursday morning brought another surprise. Daniel proudly announced Phase 1 of the migration. Several internal tools would immediately be transferred to Apex. The engineering team exchanged nervous glances. One developer whispered, already. Another muttered, that seems fast. Ryan sounded confident. We've migrated much larger environments. Ethan said nothing. Confidence wasn't the same as understanding. By lunch, the first issue appeared. A warehouse in Ohio stopped receiving automatic routing updates. Nothing critical. Just delayed. Ryan assured everyone it would be fixed within the hour. 2 hours later, another warehouse reported duplicate scheduling notifications. Still manageable. By late afternoon, customer support reported unusual shipping estimates appearing on client dashboards. Small problems. Independent problems. Nothing catastrophic. Yet, Daniel gathered everyone. These are expected adjustments during modernization. The consultants nodded confidently. Most employees accepted the explanation. Ethan quietly packed another box from his desk. One notebook. A framed certificate. The little cactus. As he reached for the last drawer, He found an old notebook dated 8 years earlier. Inside were handwritten notes from one of the company's worst outages. Every page contained the same sentence. Never assume the first problem is the real problem. He smiled to himself, closed the notebook, and slipped it into the box. Because something told him. NorthBridge was about to learn that lesson all over again. Friday arrived with an unusual kind of silence. Not the calm before a normal workday. The kind of silence that settles over a building when everyone senses something is wrong, but no one wants to say it first. Ethan parked in his usual spot at 7:10 a.m. His employee badge still worked. Barely. It would be deactivated by the end of the day. He walked through the lobby, nodded to the security guard he'd greeted almost every morning for 11 years, and rode the elevator to the 7th floor. The engineering department looked different already. Several of the Apex consultants had taken over empty desks. Whiteboards that once held handwritten diagrams were now covered with migration schedules, cloud architecture sketches, and optimistic deadlines. Everything looked organized. Almost too organized. Real systems rarely were. At 8:32 a.m., the first call came from operations. Warehouse 14 isn't receiving optimized routes. Ryan barely looked up from his laptop. We're already checking it. 20 minutes later, another notification appeared. A distribution center in Texas reported duplicate shipment assignments. Then another. Inventory synchronization was running several minutes behind schedule. Customer service began receiving complaints that delivery estimates had suddenly changed without explanation. Nothing catastrophic. Not yet. Daniel walked across the engineering floor wearing the same confident expression he'd carried all week. Minor transition issues, he announced. Exactly what we expected. Most people nodded. Ethan didn't. Around noon, Melissa appeared beside his desk. You seeing this? She held up her tablet. Across the logistics dashboard, small warning icons had begun appearing one after another. Yellow. Not red. Still recoverable. But increasing. 5 warehouses now, she said quietly. They're all reporting different symptoms. Ethan looked at the screen. No. She frowned. What? They're reporting the same problem. I don't understand. They just don't realize it yet. An hour later, Ryan hurried toward Ethan's desk. We've got a question. Ethan closed the notebook he'd been packing. Go ahead. Ryan pulled up a dashboard. The routing engine is making decisions we can't explain. It always explains them. We can't find the logic. You've looked in the code? Yes. It's not there. Ethan nodded. Correct. Ryan stared. What do you mean, correct? The routing engine doesn't only rely on code. It also relies on operational rules. We imported everything. No. Ethan shook his head. You imported software. Ryan's confidence faded for the first time all week. What's the difference? The software executes decisions. The operational rules explain why those decisions exist. Where are those stored? Ethan looked around the room. In people's heads. By mid-afternoon, the atmosphere had changed completely. Nobody was talking about modernization anymore. Now they were talking about incidents. Warehouse supervisors joined emergency conference calls. Customer support managers requested hourly updates. Finance wanted to estimate potential delays. The consultants were working faster, talking louder, typing harder. But the answers weren't coming any quicker. Daniel finally called an emergency meeting. Everyone crowded into the largest conference room. The mood was completely different from Monday. No smiles. No polished presentations. Ryan projected a system dashboard onto the wall. We've identified multiple undocumented dependencies. Ethan remained silent. Ryan continued. Several business rules appear to exist outside the technical documentation. Daniel frowned. How is that possible? One of NorthBridge's senior developers answered before Ryan could. Because documentation explains what the system does. He glanced toward Ethan. It doesn't explain why. The room became very quiet. Daniel finally turned toward Ethan. Can these issues be fixed? They already are. What? They're working exactly as designed. I don't understand. You changed assumptions. Ethan spoke calmly, without any satisfaction in his voice. The software still believes it's solving the same business problems it solved yesterday. But management changed the process. The software wasn't told why. Ryan leaned forward. So what are we missing? Ethan looked at the dashboard, then at the engineers, then back at Daniel. Experience. No one interrupted him. For 11 years, every unusual shipment, every supplier issue, every weather emergency, every customer exception taught us something. He pointed toward the routing engine. Eventually those lessons became business rules. Daniel asked quietly, and they're undocumented? Some are. Why? Because nobody writes documentation while they're preventing $1 million logistics failure at 2 o'clock in the morning. Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Honest. Near the end of the meeting, Daniel spoke again. What would you recommend? It was the first genuine question he'd asked all week. Ethan answered without hesitation. Slow down. Ryan looked surprised. That's it. Stop replacing systems you don't fully understand. Work with the people who built them. Learn before changing. Daniel looked down at the conference table. For the first time since Monday. He looked uncertain. At 5:03 p.m. Ethan carried his final box toward the elevator. His desk was empty. His email account had already been disabled. His name had disappeared from the internal directory. 11 years reduced to a cardboard box. Melissa caught him just before the elevator doors opened. I don't think they realized what they were losing. Ethan smiled. I don't think I realized it either. You angry? He considered the question. Not anymore. What now? He looked through the lobby windows at the rain finally beginning to stop. I'll take a few days off. And after that? A small smile crossed his face. I'll find a company that's looking for someone to solve problems. The elevator doors opened. He stepped inside. As they slowly closed, he watched the engineering floor disappear from view. For the first time in more than a decade, NorthBridge would face its next major challenge without the person who had quietly carried it through every previous one. And by Monday morning, everyone would finally understand what that truly meant. Monday began at 5:48 a.m. Daniel Ross hadn't slept. His inbox contained over 300 unread emails, customer complaints, warehouse reports, vendor escalation notices. 3 clients had requested emergency meetings. One had already hinted they were reviewing other logistics providers. The problems weren't catastrophic individually. Together, they were becoming expensive. Very expensive. At 7:15 a.m., the executive leadership team gathered in the boardroom. The atmosphere was nothing like the optimistic meeting they had held only a week earlier. Coffee cups sat untouched. Laptops remained open. No one smiled. The chief financial officer projected a spreadsheet onto the large display. Our shipping delays increased by 22% over the weekend. He clicked again. Customer support volume is up 41%. Another slide. We've already approved over $800,000 in service credits. The room stayed silent. Then the COO spoke. I thought Apex had taken over the platform. Ryan, who looked considerably more exhausted than he had on Monday, answered honestly. We've taken over the software. He paused before adding. We haven't taken over the experience. No one argued. Daniel finally broke the silence. I want facts. Ryan nodded. The systems are functioning. The infrastructure is healthy. The servers are stable. The code compiles. Daniel frowned. Then why are we losing money? Ryan looked directly at him. Because software is making technically correct decisions. But they're operationally wrong. The room grew quiet again. The difference suddenly became obvious. The software wasn't broken. The business was. Later that afternoon, Daniel walked through the engineering department alone. For the first time since becoming CTO, he wasn't looking at dashboards. He was looking at desks. Some belonged to developers who had spent years building the platform. Others had already been cleared after recent layoffs. Ethan's desk was completely empty. Only a faint square in the carpet remained where the filing cabinet had once stood. Daniel stood there longer than he expected. A senior engineer approached carefully. You know. Daniel turned. He used to stay here until midnight during major outages. I know. He never asked for recognition. Daniel said nothing. The engineer continued. When the warehouse fire happened 4 years ago, he slept in the office for 2 nights. When our largest client almost terminated their contract, he rebuilt the scheduling engine over a weekend. When COVID disrupted half the supply chain, he rewrote forecasting models in less than 2 weeks. Daniel slowly looked around the room. I never heard any of that. The engineer smiled sadly, because Ethan never talked about it. He was usually too busy fixing the next problem. That evening Daniel opened Ethan's personnel file. Not the HR summary, the complete history, performance reviews, project reports, peer feedback. Every annual evaluation looked almost identical. Consistently exceeds expectations. Critical contributor. Exceptional technical judgment. Trusted across all departments. Instrumental during production incidents. Page after page. Year after year. Then Daniel noticed something unusual. Every major operational success over the last decade contained Ethan's name somewhere in the report. Not in headlines. Not in executive presentations. Usually buried near the bottom. Quietly solving problems that most executives never even knew existed. Daniel leaned back in his chair. For the first time he realized something uncomfortable. NorthBridge hadn't depended on one engineer because he wrote better code. It had depended on one engineer because he understood the business better than anyone else. That kind of knowledge couldn't be transferred in 3 meetings. It couldn't be replaced by consultants. And it certainly couldn't be measured in a spreadsheet. The following morning, Daniel drove to a small coffee shop across town. Melissa had mentioned Ethan often came there after leaving the company. Sure enough, he was sitting near the window with a laptop open beside a notebook full of handwritten diagrams. He looked relaxed. For the first time in years, Daniel approached cautiously. Mind if I sit down? Ethan looked up. Of course. Daniel ordered coffee before speaking again. I owe you an apology. Ethan didn't answer immediately. He simply waited. I thought technology was our biggest asset. Daniel admitted. I was wrong. What changed your mind? Daniel smiled weakly. I finally realized technology isn't what keeps a company running. It's the people who understand why the technology exists. Ethan nodded. That's a lesson most businesses learn eventually. The expensive way. Daniel looked down at his coffee. We underestimated your contribution. You underestimated accumulated experience. That's true. We're still paying for it. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Daniel asked, if you were still leading engineering, what would you do? Ethan thought for several seconds. I wouldn't start by changing systems. I'd start by listening. To whom? The warehouse supervisors. The dispatch managers. The customer support team. The developers. The people solving problems every single day. He smiled slightly. Software is usually the easiest part. NorthBridge eventually recovered. Not overnight. Not in a month. It took nearly a year to rebuild the trust they had lost with customers and employees alike. The consultants completed their contract. Some stayed. Some moved on. Daniel remained CTO. But his leadership changed. Every major technical decision now included the engineers responsible for maintaining it. Documentation became a priority instead of an afterthought. Knowledge sharing became part of every project. Not because someone might leave, but because experience deserved to be preserved. As for Ethan, he accepted a position as chief systems architect at another logistics company. During his first meeting with the executive team, the CEO asked a familiar question. What do you need to succeed here? Ethan smiled. It was the first time in years someone had asked before expecting results. I need time to understand how your business actually works. The CEO nodded. Take all the time you need. For Ethan, that answer was worth more than any title or salary increase. Because respect couldn't be written into a contract. It couldn't be installed with new software. It couldn't be purchased from consultants. It had to be earned. And once a company truly understood that, it stopped treating experienced people like costs. It started seeing them for what they had always been: its greatest investment.